In this discussion, we will discuss the discussion question of compare the government-wide statement of net position to the balance sheet for governmental funds. If we see a discussion question or essay question such as this, our goal typically is to expand on the answer to the discussion or essay question if time allows, that making it more likely that we're going to touch on those items that are being looked for an essay question, and to be able to add new information to the discussion, picking up the most points in that format for a discussion question. Keeping that in mind, let's take a look at this one more time. Compare the government-wide statement of net position to the balance sheet for governmental funds. So if we see an essay question like this, our first goal is probably to think about those two statements, define those two statements, and then compare the differences between them. That's going to be a good way to start with this. If we wanted to expand on it from there or add new information to a discussion question, then of course we might want to take a step back and think about the financial reporting in general. What is the financial reporting goals for a governmental organization? Maybe comparing and contrasting them to the more standard financial reporting for a for-profit type of organization. So if we break this down, then we're focusing in on these components. We're looking at the government-wide type activities. You can think of that as basically the entity as a whole. It's going to be similar to the for-profit types of entities when we consider the financial statements. And we're looking at the balance sheet type of accounts, which is the statement of net position for the government-wide type of activities as compared to the balance sheet with regards to the other type of kind of sections that we're going to have, which is going to be the funds. Looking at the principal funds here, those being the governmental funds, the biggest kind of category of funds. So once again, we're breaking these out. We got the government-wide type of activity. You can think of what the differences are between the government-wide type of activities, thinking about the entity as a whole, versus to the funds, and specifically the governmental funds, which are usually breaking things down into specific components. And that's going to be the first difference that you might want to just go into first and think about, well, the difference in terms of the way the balance sheet type of form, the balance sheet type report, is going to be a result of, in part, the difference between these two kind of components. The government-wide type of activity reporting on the government as a whole, looking at economic flows of resources in a similar fashion as we might think of for a for-profit type of entity. The fund accounting looking more closely at short-term flows. So we're thinking about more of the short-term type of activities, and therefore using the modified accrual basis. So when we think about these two reports, the governmental funds is going to be more of the funny one, using more of the modified accrual, and the government-wide is going to be what we would think is kind of more standard in a way, using more of a standard accrual method. The result of that then is that in the government-wide statement of net position, we're going to see something such as a breakout between the components of assets and liabilities, between what we would normally think of, what we would normally see in a for-profit, current assets and the long-term versus current liabilities and long-term liabilities. When we think about the balance sheet for the funds, the governmental funds on the modified accrual basis, because they're on the short-term flow activity, they're focusing on short-term flows, we don't see the long-term components. We're not going to break out current and long-term. They're all going to be current because it's a modified accrual. So when we look at the balance sheet, we're not going to see those components within it. We're just going to see, the assets, and the assets, of course, we know are going to be, in essence, the current assets, because we're thinking about a modified accrual basis focusing on current flows. Same with the liabilities. We're not going to have a breakout of the current liabilities in the long term. We're going to have liabilities, and those liabilities will be considered to be current given the fact that they're governmental funds and therefore have no long term. Also, the government-wide report, which is going to be the statement of net position, is going to combine together or aggregate all governmental activities. So that's going to include the general fund, the special revenue, the capital projects, the debt service, the permanent funds, and some of the internal service funds, and report those basically in just one column when we're thinking about the government-wide type of activity. Those, by the way, being the major funds. When we think about the types of funds that the government can have, then of course we're going to have them broken out into the fund's financial statements, and every government's going to have basically the general fund, and that's going to be required. There's only going to be one of them. And then we have what is required or what might be needed depending on the government of other types of funds that are going to fall into the category of the governmental funds, which would include special revenue type funds, capital projects funds, the debt service funds, the permanent funds. So the balance sheet for the funds is, of course, going to break those items out, and they're going to have their own column, their own line. For the general fund and each of the major funds that are going to be defined as major funds. And then we can combine all other funds into one column that are not going to be considered to be major funds.